Hello, everyone. I am Danny Simmons.
And I'm Robert Moore. We're here to teach, we're here to learn, because all of us need to know more about Jesus.
And so in this episode, we will be looking at Jesus and his words that are found in Matthew chapter 5, verses 33 through 48. Before we read these passages, we do like to at least stop for a moment and remind all of us where we are and what's happening and who Jesus is talking to. And on this day, when the Lord is delivering the Sermon on the Mount, it's important for us to remember that Jesus lived his entire life under the Mosaic law, and he's preaching kingdom truths. He's delineating the law of God with perfect accuracy and setting his Father's will before these people as they listen to him carefully on the mountainside. This is heaven's perspective of the things that are happening on the earth, and Jesus is delivering them to them and certainly to the rest of us. As we noted last week, he's going to say, "You have heard" 5 times, and one time he says, "It has been said," but in each time he will follow up with that, "But I say to you." And so our reading is going to pick up right in the middle of these clarifications. We're right in the middle of these 6 statements of, "You have heard, but I say unto you."
Yes, and let's remember that as we've looked at these, you have heard that it was said, but I say unto you, all this that he teaches hinges on what he had said in verse 20. He's teaching about things that his disciples, changes that they must make, things that must be characteristic of their lives if their righteousness is to exceed those of the scribes and the Pharisees, and if his disciples are going to be those who enter into the kingdom of heaven. So let's keep that in mind, because that's the context of basically the things that have been taught so far, whether it was, we talked about anger and lust, and then, of course, a few verses that he gave on divorce. And now we look at oaths and retaliation, and then loving our enemies.
Yes, sir. So these are the words of Jesus as they are found in Matthew chapter 5, beginning in verse 33. "Again, you have heard that it was said to those of old, 'You shall not swear falsely, but shall perform your oaths to the Lord.' But I say to you, do not swear at all, neither by heaven, for it is God's throne, nor by the earth, for it is his footstool, nor by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great King. Nor shall you swear by your head, because you cannot make one hair white or black. But let your yes be yes and your no, no. For whatever is more than these is from the evil one. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you not to resist an evil person. But whoever slaps you on your right cheek, turn the other to him also. If anyone wants to sue you and take away your tunic, let him have your cloak also. And whoever compels you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Give to him who asks you, and from him who wants to borrow from you, do not turn away. You have heard it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies. Bless those who persecute you. Bless those who curse you. Do good to those who hate you, and pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you, that you may be the sons of your Father in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and the good. He sends the rain on the just and on the unjust. For if you love those who love you, what reward have you? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet your brethren only, what do you do more than others? Do not even the tax collectors do so? Therefore, you shall be perfect, just as your Father in heaven is perfect." And so again, we start with some very, very challenging sayings. We'll back up to verse 33 as we have begun the reading here today. Again, you have heard that it was said of those of old, you shall not swear falsely, but shall perform your oaths to the Lord. He says, do not swear at all, neither by heaven, for it is God's throne. Don't swear by the earth, it's God's footstool, nor by Jerusalem, it is the city of the great King. So I think the point here is don't swear.
That would be the what I would hear if I was, I'm thinking about myself again sitting in the audience, and I've already listened to what the Lord has taught prior to this. I'm seeing where he's going. We've talked about how he's taken the focus off what is external, because he's saying, listen, if we get those things worked out within the heart, the external is going to line up. And so now he begins to talk about something that maybe I would have been more familiar with in that day regarding the taking of oaths or swearing upon certain things. Or maybe I knew it was the habit of actually the religious leaders. And now I'm thinking about having a better righteousness than the scribe or the Pharisee, remembering kind of what they're known for as far as maybe swearing or taking oaths, and really those of being of little value, right? That they could just break those almost as easily as they were said. And so again, as a listener in his audience that day, that definitely would have grabbed my attention.
Oh, absolutely. And the phrase he begins with, you shall not swear, or you shall not swear falsely, that's Leviticus 19:12. Then you shall perform your oaths to the Lord. I found that in Deuteronomy 23 in verse 23. And like you said, he's saying to us, look down deeper. People understand this truth. People understand the value of an individual or a friend who says, I will be there. And that is it, Robert. Mm-hmm. I don't need you to add anything to that. I don't need to bring, what like some people do, your children or your mother's grave into the conversation. I've heard people say, I swear on my mother's grave. Man, please don't do that. There's too much that could go wrong here, and you can't fulfill your word. How about let's just agree that this is what we will strive to do, which goes back to what James told us, that you should not just say, well, we're going to go to such and such city, make a certain amount of money, we'll be back at this time. He says such boasting is evil because you don't know what tomorrow will bring. So there's a reverence for God in saying, if the Lord wills, Lord permitting, Robert, I will do these things. I want to be there. I want to help you, whatever the case may be. And you can take that for what it's worth, literally, because I've told you that that's what it is. And as I've thought about this particular section here, I know people in my life, at least throughout the years of my life, who say, I'll pay you back. I swear, on Tuesday, I swear. And if they say they swear 4 or 5 times, I'm pretty sure that I would start to draw back a little bit and go, something isn't right. You should not have to swear that many times for me to know that you're telling me the truth, right?
I believe, yes, no doubt.
And some people do that repeatedly, almost habitually, like, I swear. You're basically telling people, I have let everyone down before. I'm not very good at this. I don't ever keep my word, but this time's different, and so they think somehow that gives them more, at least it gives the message they're sending more strength. And Jesus is dealing with that. He's saying, don't do that. And he lists some things they should not swear by. Don't swear by heaven. That's God's throne. It doesn't belong to you. You can't swear by heaven. Do not swear by earth, because that's not yours either. That's God's footstool. And then something else, I don't know if you have this or not in your notes, but do not swear by Jerusalem. That he says it's the city of the great king. They're under Roman rule. What do you think about that?
Well, I'm pretty sure I knew who he meant, whether his audience understood that or not. But obviously he would eventually be obviously king. God is also king. God meant to be the king of his people way back in the Old Testament. And of course they wanted to be like other nations, which is why they asked for a king, and he gave them Saul. And of course that began a unified kingdom under Saul, David, and Solomon that eventually split under Rehoboam and Jeroboam. And of course then you have the rest of the Old Testament history shows us how that plays out and everything. But it's a very interesting statement that they do make. In listening to you and in thinking about, again, the teachings as it would apply to the people then, as I'm reflecting on my life and my word with my fellow man, with my companion in life, with my spouse, with my children, with my brethren, whatever that may involve. Obviously, it's the when we have bought something, the paying of debts, where I'm signing something, this is my word, I'm going to be true to my word. And that's what I hear you saying, and that's really the habit that we need to either create or we need to bring it back. It is simply let our word be believable because we do what our word says, and again, if we'll be those kind of people, we'll be trustworthy. It made me think about in the olden days when they would make a deal, long before we had all the documents that have to be signed now regarding a sale of a piece of land or whatever it may be. It wasn't too long ago that if you and I were like working something out, we just did the deal and we shook each other's hand. And the shaking of that hand was basically, hey, our word that this is what we're going to do, or that's what he's going to do. And I trust that.
Yep. And we would lose sleep if it wasn't going to come to pass the way we promised that it would, because there was something to be said for your own name, for your word. Your word is your bond. Your word is gold. And if you use that to take advantage of someone, it's no longer of any value to that person or to anyone in that community. So it meant everything. And like you said, these days, you have to get lawyers involved. There's all kinds of paperwork and legalities and liability paperwork. It's so sad. It just points to a broken world that has fallen in sin and is turned away from God, the mess we find ourselves in, even in the simplest of things. And Jesus is just calling us back. How about this? Let your yes be yes and your no be no. He says to them, which one of you can't even swear by your own head. So now my head belongs to me, and I still shouldn't swear by my own head. And then he says, because you can't make one hair white or black. Now, this was before Clairol, Vidal Sassoon, and Just for Men. But at this time, he is absolutely right. There's just no way you're going to change the color of your hair. And there's a truth there that you can look at your head all day and just wish and pray and whatever else you want to try to do. That color is not going to change. And they knew that. It's just such a basic earthly truth where it's like, okay, well, I can take hold of that. I sure know that's true. I've seen grandma. Her hair's white. I've seen my grandfather, whatever. And so now from that, then live that way. Mm-hmm. And it's a beautiful way that Jesus feeds us and delivers these great things to us.
And he won't stop there. He'll develop that idea as we continue, in our study. There'll be times when the Lord will say, hey, listen, even if you worry this much, do you think you can add, some kind of length to your life or whatever it may be? The teaching was basically that our lives are under the control of God, and we needed to be mindful of that and trust in that. And the concept of basically just let your word be good, it's not new. I was reminded in Joshua chapter 2 when the spies were sent to Jericho, there was 2 of them. And remember, that's Rahab who hides them on her roof because there's a threat their lives would be taken if they knew they were there. And so once she has showed them a favor, and she's also very aware of who God is. Jehovah is God. He's the God of heaven, and we know he's the one that's brought you guys out of captivity. When you come and this city is destroyed, we want you to remember us. And so they basically said, okay, we'll do that, but here's what you're going to need to do. You're going to need to leave this sign out of the window so we'll know kind of where you're at. And everybody who's in that room, y'all all be okay. I didn't read anything. I swear upon the tabernacle, or I swear up on the name of Moses, or there's no swearing. It was just the word of the 2 spies saying, hey, we're going to, now I thought about that some more because they're not the leaders.
Right.
They're not Moses. They'll have to go back and they're going to have to report to Joshua, this is how things worked out, Joshua. And we told them this. So think about that. They even took it upon themselves. Their word was good enough that basically they said, hey, this is what we'll do. They went back, told Joshua, we told them this is what we'll do. And when it came time that the walls of Jericho fell down, that's exactly what they did. And everybody was preserved.
That's right. Joshua declares as they're about to take that city, the house of Rahab, we will preserve that home. And so he, not only, like you said, not only did he listen to what they told him that they told her, he tells the entire nation, stick to the promise that these 2 have made. So there it is, right?
How powerful.
I know. And so now her name is written in Hebrews 11 because people did what they said they were going to do. There's so many great lessons there. I love that.
I'm sure we could find many examples of that, but that is one that came to my mind.
Yeah. And so let me give one last thing on this section that we're reading, because we want to remind everyone, and we certainly want to remind ourselves, strive to let your yes be yes and your no be no. Let that be your character, your makeup. This is who you are. You are dependable. You know that it is only if the Lord permits, but when you say that you will, then you will. And it just says so much about your character, your devotion, and your reverence for God. He concludes this segment by saying, let your yes be yes and your no be no. Anything more is from the evil one. That turns up the level of seriousness to me. Charles John Ellicott wrote this about this passage. These devices of fantastic oaths do not come from him who is the truth, but from him who, when he speaks a lie, he speaks from his own resources. And he quotes, that's John 8:44. When the devil speaks a lie, he speaks of his own resources. That's not from God. It's not from the truth, because he's a liar from the beginning. And so the statement here is, do not put yourself in a position to become a liar. Just say what you know to be true. Isn't that just so good?
It is. And in listening to you, I'm reminded that there's going to be some times when we need to say no, because there's only so much time in a day, and we all have various responsibilities in our lives. And there's a lot of times a lot that can be asked of us, and we've got to find the balance. Or we may say we need to set sometimes some boundaries, because again, to say yes every time really sets you up for failure, because there may be some times when you absolutely can't fulfill that, right? And you're going to have to realize that there's some things I can do and there's some things I just don't have time to do. And in those situations, I'm just going to have to say no.
And if you're a person of your word, your no is just as powerful as your yes, because the person who's heard you say no, when in a moment they needed you, like you said, your schedule's full, you can't do it. They know you've been there before and you have kept your word then. And so you're not skipping out or hiding or taking the easy path. You simply can't. And so to say simply, yes, I'll be there, and then get to a time when you have to say no, that's perfectly okay.
Absolutely.
Because you know in your heart that you can't, and they're going to know by the consistency of the truth of your word that you can't. And so there's so much comfort there that I have a friend I can depend on, even though, when they say no, I can depend on that, right?
Yeah, sure.
It just can't happen.
Sure.
And so whether that hurts me or not is irrelevant. The fact is that I can believe them when they say something. I can take them at their word. You remember when, I think in the first episode we did, that I mentioned that James, the half brother of Jesus, tends to borrow a lot that Jesus says on the Sermon on the Mount. Let me just give you a passage from James 5:12. But above all, my brethren, do not swear either by heaven or by earth or with any other oath. Sound familiar?
There you go.
But let your yes be yes and your no be no, lest you fall into judgment. So James is also clued in on that when he writes his letter. So these are really good things, really good things. As you said, the people sitting and listening, he's moving along. He's going to go to the next point, and they're just like, wow, what did he just say?
But something that they could do.
Yes.
Again, if they're in the audience listening that day, even with us or people that will listen to this and think, sometimes I haven't been as good as I should when it comes to my word. Well, what Jesus is teaching is something that's doable. I need to, I realize I can do better here. I'm going to do better. I'm going to pray about that. And you move forward and you begin to put together a body of work. Your fruit now becomes this. My yes is my yes, and my no is my no, and I don't have to do anything, say anything beyond that.
Exactly. All we have to do now is do what we would hope these people would do after hearing his gracious words. Get to it. That's right. That's why he's telling us this. So we're actually in the crowd now in that sense.
Yes.
It applies to the heart.
Absolutely.
Verse 38, you have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, but I tell you not to resist an evil person. Whoever slaps you on your right cheek, turn the other to him also. If anyone wants to sue you and take away your tunic, let him have your cloak also. And whoever compels you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Give to him who asks you, and from him who wants to borrow from you, do not turn away. So this eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, very famous saying, even up until today. Mm-hmm. It's just a phrase that is used. We just did a podcast on faithful expressions, or the expressions of the faithful. This is one of them, things that just come from the Bible that people say. Mm-hmm. Eye for an eye. And we all know what that means. And here he says, but I tell you. So if I use the eye for an eye instruction that God had given in the old law, and someone slaps me on the right cheek, then I'm popping them on their right cheek. And what is solved in that? What good has been accomplished?
No good.
I've simply met them at the lowest part of at least what they've reached at this point, to strike someone else in the face. That if I retaliate and say, by law, I can hit you right in the face just the way you did me, that absolutely nothing is gained there. Even the one who strikes back won't be satisfied.
Had we been in the audience and been a scribe or a Pharisee and were familiar with the law, when the Lord said, you have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, I might have even had it committed to memory to know he's speaking from Exodus 21:24, Leviticus 24:20, Deuteronomy 19:21, because that is the command as it was written by Moses. But if we go back and look at how it was given to the people back then, it was given to regulate the decision of magistrates, of judges. And again, just like they've done with these other laws, Jesus is having to teach about this. He's having to show them the incorrect way they're thinking now, because they've taken a law that applied basically to the magistrate or to a judge, and now they've extended it to all private conduct. And so now they basically can just seek revenge privately, and they can use for their trump card, as you said earlier, an eye for an eye.
That's right.
But again, he's trying to teach that their conduct now is going to be governed by a different principle. It's not going to be retaliation like that. There's going to be a different response that the Lord wants his disciples to make.
Yes,
you
sir.
mentioned in our world today, when someone insults another person, in essence, slaps them on the right cheek, what is likely to be the reaction? Well, likely they're going to insult back, they're going to slap back, or even we see many times that escalate, and what they do in retaliation is even worse. We brought up a week or two ago what happens sometimes out in traffic, and someone does something, insults someone in traffic, and the person that is insulted takes that sometimes rather, to a higher level, and sometimes people end up losing their lives. That's the application. And Jesus is basically saying, listen, my disciples, my learners, people who are going to follow me, their heart is going to be different from within. They're going to think differently. They're going to have already prepared themselves so when these things do happen, their response, as we'll note, is going to be like the response of Jesus.
Yes,
now
sir.
we begin to look at his life and look at how he responded, and then that teaches us, okay, now I understand better how I ought to respond in situations like that.
And he is always the perfect example, slapped on the cheek, and could have retaliated in a greater force than any man had ever seen before. He told Peter, I can pray to God, and he will send 12 legions of angels. This can be fixed the second that I will it to be so. And he accepted the abuse then. I think there's comfort, and you can certainly tell me how you feel about this, but there should be a level of comfort for us that if you're faithful to the Lord and you know that you're a child of God by the word of God and what's been written and your obedience to that, you're trying to serve the Lord. Someone literally slaps you on the face, and then you turn, to show them, I'm not going to fight you. If this is better for you, then I'll give my own flesh to let you work this out. That God knows that one of his children have been stricken, right? And I think, Paul says, vengeance belongs to me. I will repay, saith the Lord. Do not seek vengeance is the commandment given in Romans 12. Live peaceably among all men as much as you are able. And so to me, there's some comfort there that God is in full understanding of what's taking place, that I am simply following the commandment and the instruction of Jesus, and in that I'm victorious, because it takes a whole lot more strength to withhold the retaliation than to just let it loose, I think.
Well, that's a valid point. Let me ask the question, let's think for a moment, but why is it that we might struggle so much with this? And I'm reminded that from childhood, depending on how we've been raised and what we've been taught, we might have had parents who believed in the teachings of the Bible. And because of that, as children and growing up as teenagers, we might have been taught by our parents, listen, if somebody picks on you, if somebody does this, you need to walk away, or you need to, in essence, turn the other cheek. Well, there was a price that you paid if you did that. Now you're labeled chicken and made fun of. And so there was tremendous pressure growing up in not retaliating. Now, I'm talking about a Bible-based family. In the world, I'm pretty sure maybe parents there might have said, listen, they do that to you. You teach them a lesson. And so they've even learned to retaliate. And so what was children become adults. And so all of a sudden, these insults are, again, the response is equal or greater than that. So the Lord, again, is getting his audience there and getting us to understand, listen, I'm going to show you what this means. Because in my life, in essence, we're going to see the Lord called a glutton. He's called a drunk. In John 8, he's called an illegitimate child. Some people would use a curse word to describe that in our day and age.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
He's called a blasphemer. They say he's demon-possessed, and John will point out that there's some who said he was insane. You think about, that's what we have recorded. You think about him growing up as a young man, as a teenager, and how he was in obedience to his parents in all things. You know, there was occasions in which other teenagers who were bullies and who were mean did and said things to the Lord, and yet his response was always true. It was always Christ-like because that's who he was. Again, in light of that, even Peter talks about, when he was reviled, 1 Peter chapter 2, beginning in verse 21, for hereunto were you called, because Christ also suffered for you. Notice now, leaving you an example that you should follow in his steps. Now, what's Peter speaking of? Well, we just continue to read. Christ, again, who did no sin, neither was guile found in his mouth, who when he was reviled not again, when he suffered, threatened not. So there's the example. And so again, what Jesus is asking his audience here and what we're learning from this, you must have a righteousness that exceeds that of the scribes and the Pharisees. And you must have this type of attitude if you want to enter into the kingdom of heaven. So again, these are difficult, but I must understand it's something that I must obey and incorporate into my heart, even if my inclinations in the past, because of having difficulty controlling my emotions and my reactions, be that as it may, I must then work on that, pray to God for that, and eventually I'm going to overcome that.
Yeah. Yeah, those are great points. Like you said, these things start at a very early age when we're tested in this way. And so even in our own training, we're already moving in a direction, and Jesus, as you said, cutting through that and saying, here is what you should do. Here's what you must do. Again, this is from the perspective of heaven, that God is pleased when he sees us respond in this way. Someone's going to sue you and take away your tunic. There's this picture. Every time I read that, I see a man removing that from himself, taking that off, handing it to him. A guy comes up and says, I'm filing suit against you. I think that's mine. And as he's yelling, just take it off and hand it to him, and then grab the cloak and just give him that as well. And, it to me, it calls to mind the soft answer turns away wrath. That anyone coming to you wanting to file a lawsuit about clothing is going to be wildly surprised when you say, let's just skip the whole court thing. You can have it. That you're not a wimp in the sense that, as you said, that people would call it like, wow, that was pretty weak of you just to hand everything over. No, it's that I believe in the one who provides. This isn't mine. It's been granted to me for the time being, and this is what God's told me to do with it when the situation arises. So again, just a godly character. I've always trusted that God will provide. God guides and provides. And so if I'm following his guidance, I'll find another shirt, right? Mm-hmm. And I've avoided this knockdown drag out with this guy who obviously just wants to fight over something that's not worth it.
As you said, it's not a weakness. We've already looked at a beatitude, and that's what it is. It's meekness, right?
Yes,
that's
sir.
Great strength, but that strength is under control. That's what's going on here. And so be mindful of that. Let's also just address, because sometimes when we read through these passages about turning the other cheek, someone will bring up this idea as far as, we can't even defend ourselves or defend our family against violence and those type of things. And what we must understand is defending ourselves against violence, defending our family against violence is not under consideration.
Exactly.
We consider the context. If you want to know what the context is, that's the reading of verse 40, 41, and 42. He ends up telling us this is the kind of matters that I'm talking about, not something along that line, because we will see that there was times when violent people were getting ready to carry out violence against Jesus, and he even changed his appearance or did something and walked out amongst them. So he just didn't let them, be violent to him. And we can find other examples of that as well. So let's just make sure we understand those type of situations is not what's under consideration here.
Exactly. I'm so glad you said that. I have here later just to remind myself that some discretion is required in these things. It points to the heart. Is this who I am? And in the tunic situation, I can quickly know who I am. You're not taking this. I know where I bought this. You know, I've had this for however long, and I end up building a case for myself because I'll fight you to the end. That something may be misapplied in my own heart and my life about what these things are and the true value of them. And so discretion is involved. And I think that goes throughout these passages, 38 through 42. Someone compels you to go a mile, go with him 2. Again, that's just taking the high road in a difficult situation. The Roman soldiers were permitted to lay a sword on your shoulder and bind you by law to carry equipment or whatever else they needed help with for 1 mile. Jesus is saying in this moment, take it 2. Man, that's tough.
Yes, but we've all had contact with people who this was what was characteristic of their lives, and hopefully it's characteristic of us as well from time to time, that we, in essence, we do a job, but we don't just do the bare minimum of the job. We go above and beyond. Our employers, or whether it's in school, whatever it may be, they see someone who not only fulfills the obligation, but is willing to do more than necessary. That's the kind of mindset we need to have, especially when asked to help in some particular situation. Not only will I do what you've asked, but what else in addition can I do?
Yeah, that's exactly it. That's just a condition of the heart. And we see that in good people within the Lord's church who won't stop working sometimes. And you say, go home. Mm-hmm. You know a few, I know you do. And so do I. And so there's where Jesus is found, that a servant who is willing to serve and to see it through to the end. And then when everything is done that they came and agreed to be a part of, they see one other little thing that just needs a little bit of attention and gladly go and do that and don't want the attention from men. It's just such a great, great blessing to know someone like that.
Think about tying what you just said back then to the person whose yes is yes and no is no. See, if you put those two things together in those few times when someone has to say no because they've said yes so many times, and even when they say yes, you know you're going to get more than you bargained for. They're going to go above and beyond. Then we're getting, again, more a complete picture of what the righteousness is that Jesus is requiring of his people then and of us today. Let your word be true, and when you do something, do it with all your might. Don't leave any way for people to question your job.
That's exactly right. It's so good. Jesus is always found there. And the final thing that he says, give him who asks you. From him who wants to borrow, do not turn away. And so again, this is kind of where my discretion note was, that there is discretion involved here because there's a lot of people who want a lot of things, and everyone who followed this to its fullest extent would just be completely broke and have nothing for themselves or their family, which again, there are requirements by God to care for those that he's put into your care, giving you rule or control over as a father, as a parent. And so something here has got to be weighed out and considered, at least at the very basest of levels. And a quote I found that I like, it says that a miser is not a follower of Jesus. And I like that. I think that says it very well. Someone who's like, oh no, this is mine, that will never find an opportunity to help or to give. And that's not what the Lord wants to see from us.
Absolutely. Yeah. All your points are so valid.
Let me give you a couple of verses. Proverbs 3:27 through 28. Do not withhold good from the deserving when it is within your power to act. Do not tell your neighbor, come back tomorrow and I will provide, when you already have the means. 1 John 3:17. If anyone with earthly possessions sees his brother in need, but withholds his compassion from him, how can the love of God abide in him? So this is serious. James 2, verses 15 through 16. If a brother or sister is without clothes and daily food, if one of you tells him, depart in peace and be warmed and filled, but does not provide for his physical needs, what good is that? So again, just this restating what Jesus says here throughout Scripture. There's a condition of heart when you know you have the means to help, and your words will fall flat on the ground if you don't provide that help and follow through with what you claim to hope for that individual. So it goes back to your yes being yes, and yes, I can help you, and then just to do that.
It really shows how he's also going to develop this idea of a servant's attitude, just the kind of attitude we ought to have toward others. A willingness to help, a willingness to go above and beyond. And even if it's going to cost us, I think about that outer cloak, that outer coat that they would have. Again, in the Old Testament, there will be laws that if someone gives you by way of pledge that outer coat, you get it back to them by the end of the day, because it'd be the very thing that might actually keep them warm and keep them freezing at nighttime. So again, it was a very valuable piece of clothing. So it is very possible that sometimes it may cost us something financially. More times than not, maybe it's just time that people are so reluctant to give up.
Yeah, exactly. And it is a challenge. You got to make time, don't you?
We do.
You've got to cut something out so that you can be there and help. So the final section here is really, the subtitle I have is Love Your Enemies. 43, he says, you've heard, and that's why these statements are important to us, because he says, you heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. Now, if you're like me and you look at each one of these you have heard, you're looking in the Old Testament for these key words, and I cannot find this. Love your neighbor and hate your enemy. I see little flavors of it where, the people of Moab cannot enter into the tabernacle for 10 generations. There's some instruction on how to deal with foreigners and all. I don't see hate anywhere, though. So how in the world is this the common saying of the day? You can love your neighbor and you just hate your enemy as much as you want. That's God's will.
It kind of reminds us of some of the things that we have already studied. You have heard that it was said, but I say unto you. And it was how that the laws as they were given initially have been sort of modified, and they've lost their potency, and they've been changed to accommodate human feelings. And over time, accepted as, well, this is what the law says.
Mm-hmm.
And as you just said, it is not.
No, it is not found. And so not only does he clear things up, he goes to the extreme, back to the holy and the righteous nature and character that man can attain. That's what boggles my mind in this, is that, no, you love your enemies. Now, that's plural. You think of one that you're really having trouble with and can't even think of anything that would start a good conversation. It always turns sour. They clearly hate you. Everything becomes negative instantly. And no matter how you try to extend that olive branch to them, we are back in the pit within seconds. And so, enemy, how do you love someone who would rather you be dead? Because that's the enemies of Christ. That's what they did. They delivered him to a foreign government to be sure that he was executed by the hands of lawless men. A brother in the nation of Israel was turned over gladly because of how much they hated him. And so this requirement now from Jesus that we would love them, bless them, and do good to them and pray for them. There's a few people I think of in the moment of Jesus in his crucifixion. One is Malchus, mm-hmm. the servant of the high priest. Mm-hmm. Peter pulls a sword out and chops his ear off. Jesus could have just looked at Malchus and thought, you deserve that, because mm-hmm. tonight's going to be a hard night for me. So good luck with your one ear. And what does he do?
Mm-hmm.
He picks it up off of the ground and heals the man's ear.
You bet.
He did good. He blessed. He assisted someone who is there to bring him in. It's amazing.
It is. And interesting that it'll be the physician Luke that is one gospel writer who records that particular miracle. Mm. I think again about his audience here. If we've come here, we're hearing this discourse from Jesus. He has set this whole thing up. You want to have a better righteousness than these scribes and Pharisees, these people who we would have considered the most religious people of the day, and we're hanging on every word. And now he gets to this part regarding loving our enemies. And I'm sitting in this audience and I'm thinking, well, I know who some of my enemies are. In fact, we're oppressed by these enemies. We're actually waiting for a savior. We're actually for a deliverer, because we think there's going to be a physical deliverance from these enemies of ours. Yeah. And now He's just asked me to love them. He's asked me to pray for these people. In fact, he's asked me to do good for these people. If they ask you to go a mile, I want you to do good and show them you're my disciple by going 2. You go above and beyond. And so that's truly a change for the better for these people. And then as we begin to incorporate these things into our lives, we too are going to live in a society. It may actually be someone within the family. It could be a spouse. It could be a child. It could be someone who's opposing God. It could be somebody in the workforce, whatever that may be. And yet what Jesus is teaching is I still have to have a love for them. And I'm understanding that, and I think the audience does as well. I'm not running up to them and thinking we just got to hug and make up. But I have a greater love for them. I realize that they have a soul, and if they stay in the condition in which they're in, eventually they'll stand before the God in judgment and be condemned for their ungodliness. And I don't want that for them, no matter who they are, and no matter how much a threat they are to me or my family. I want them to see what we see in Jesus and the hope that is in him. So we've got to understand that. And I might just add, what God is demanding here goes beyond simply not retaliating. He's not saying, listen, when your enemy is mean to you, as long as you don't retaliate, you're good. No, he's basically saying, not only are you not going to retaliate, you're actually going to pray for them. You're actually going to bless them. You're actually going to even do good for them if opportunity presents it.
That's service.
That is it.
All of it is service to them and for the sake of their soul. It's an understanding of what that which is greater, and it's really a challenge to take hold of. When you line those up, your enemy is cursing you, hating you, persecuting you, spitefully using. That's such powerful language. You're being spitefully used. Then you turn and do this. And as you said, do good, pray, bless. And so that is where Jesus is found. And Jesus, again, knowing the weight of this commandment and how difficult this will be, he connects it to something. Then you will be the sons of your Father in heaven. And not only is that part of the deal from God himself, but God is doing the same thing I'm telling you to do, because he sends the sun on the wicked and on the good. He sends the rain on the just and the unjust. God is already fulfilling this commandment that I've offered to you. You're a son of God because you are in line with the way he reacts to those who spitefully use him and curse him and hate him, right? Mm-hmm. Jesus is there because these people hate him, hate God. Wow. I mean, so you think, well, that's too hard. I can't do that. No. Slow down for a minute. Listen to the teacher, understand who he is and why he's even here. And he's saying, come with me. Let's do it together. Now I'm part of something very special, aren't I?
You are. Let's go a few years down the road. You're going to have the Apostle Paul, formerly Saul of Tarsus, a persecutor of those disciples, followers of Jesus. You have him writing a letter to the Christians who lived in the city of Rome. And he says in chapter 12, verse 13, if your enemy hunger, feed him. If he thirst, give him to drink. So there's that change of heart that you have. You're not retaliating. In fact, if you have an opportunity to feed, to give someone a water, even if they're enemies, you do that. And then he says, for in so doing, you shall heap coals of fire upon his head. Sometimes we think, well, that's the motivation behind giving the drink or behind giving the food, is we're sure hoping this just heaps coals of fire. It just really just gets their goat. What he's given there is the result. That's what the result will be. You're doing it because that's what the Lord has asked you to do. And it could be that the result will be, well, it's going to heap coals of fire. And again, he finishes that 12th chapter, be not overcome of evil, but overcome evil with good. And that's the effort that we ought to make, no matter how vicious the enemy might be. We ought to do all we can to do good, to bless, to pray for, so that eventually they're not our enemy. Maybe they're our brother and sister in Christ.
Yes, sir. And that's always the goal. That's what we want. The idea, if you greet your brethren only, what do you do more than others? He mentions the tax collectors. So again, that's kind of like the lowest part of society. According to most Jews, they thought that, especially Jews who were tax collectors for the Romans, they were traitors. And it's an interesting picture that tax collectors greet one another and they bless one another, because that's really all they have is one another. Tax collector, you and we're both tax collectors and we're of Jewish descent. I can be kind to you. We kind of understand where we are and why we've made the decisions we've made. The rest of the world hates us. So he says they come together and greet each other because they're already united by some other thing. There's nothing special there. That's the nature of man, is to get together with those who they have things in common with and go, man, aren't we great? Aren't we special? Don't we get it? And the rest of them don't. There's no reward from heaven there. That's not where the challenge is found or met. It is found and met when we assist those who hate and spitefully use us. So I think that's interesting too. It's just so easy to go and congratulate someone who's just like me and doesn't disagree with me in anything. The challenge is finding someone who disagrees with everything I think and say, and find a way to be a servant to them.
Try to find that common ground. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yep.
So we've read through the first chapter of
the last verse, 48. You therefore shall be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. Let's say something just quickly about that, because this is going to come up again. But let's look at that idea, because perfect. Well, let's just back up for a second. So we see a verse like this: "You shall be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect." And then, if we take it out of context, or if I don't really have an understanding regarding what Jesus is teaching, I'm thinking he's asking his audience, and now he's asking me in regard to perfection, sinlessness. But again, a deeper understanding of the word will know that that's just not the case. It's the idea of maturity. It's having certain degrees of qualities that are peculiar to a person, and they're at the highest level. And it made me think about, as he finishes, of course, we have a chapter division here. Of course, he's going to keep teaching. But when he uses the word perfect, and I'm trying to understand it, I want us to remember, and I want our audience to remember, that there are two basic rules when it comes to understanding the Bible. One would be context. So I need to read the verses that surround what I just read and understand this verse in light of what it's surrounded by. That's going to be one thing that's going to give me a proper or an accurate interpretation of the verse. The other thing will be harmony. How does this verse harmonize with other verses in the Bible that teach regarding the same things? And then when I understand harmony, I need to apply an additional rule, and that way, maybe if I have two verses that are teaching about the same thing, let's say one is sort of simple and not too difficult to understand, but one is a little bit more challenging and a little bit deeper, I need to try and understand the second, the one that's a little bit more challenging and deeper, in light of the one that was simple. You would probably use the word lens-wise. I need to look through the lens of that simple verse toward the difficult, as opposed to looking at the hard one and then trying to interpret the simple. So let's keep these rules. This is going to come up, and this is a perfect example, because again, when he uses the word perfect here, it doesn't have anything to do with sinlessness. And this word perfect appears a number of times. But as it relates to the context here, you are to be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. The tax gatherers and the Gentiles in the previous verses, and you just alluded to, who did they love? They loved people like them. Now, if we want to have a better righteousness than the scribes and the Pharisees, Jesus is describing perfection from the standpoint of the highest perfect of love here. The highest degree of love is to love your enemies, those who do not love you. And when we do that, we're doing like the Heavenly Father does. So such a good time to introduce that, and hopefully we'll revisit that again from time to time as we study the Bible and we encourage others to study the Bible. How can we best understand context and harmony?
Yeah, that's good. I had looked at this as well, this idea of, being perfect, that Job came to mind when God speaks of Job to Satan. He says, "Have you considered my servant Job? There's none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, one who fears God and shuns evil." This idea of blameless is perfect. And in the word blameless, that can't be right, because the devil does nothing but blame Job. His friends show up. They blame him for several chapters straight. Blameless is that even if an accusation is brought against you, it won't stick, that you have been faithful to the Lord and you're spiritually mature to the extent that you are found perfect. So, it's not as strict as we may tend to want to make it.
There'll be other terms that we'll introduce at some point because it's going to be throughout the text and begin to talk about these from the standpoint of thinking of what our practice is. You think about people who practice righteousness. What you see in their life is, in essence, it's perfection. It's not sinlessness. It just means that what you see, for the most part, it's always that they're doing what is right. And that's contrasted with one who practices sin. Someone who practices sin, their habit or their walk is sinful. And the one who chooses to be a disciple of Christ chooses to practice righteousness. Their habit is righteousness. That is their walk. That is their conversation. And when that is applied day after day after day, you will see a maturity. You will see someone who will grow up in the faith, and that will be, within that context, someone who is now perfect. And it is something that we can do because he says, you therefore shall be perfect. So it is something that we can attain, and we know it's not sinlessness because we can get better there, but that's not attainable.
Yes, sir. Well said. Well, let me just do a brief recap of what we've read today, the challenging verses that we've read, and the good study that we've been engaged in today. We always want to thank everyone for being with us. Here are the commandments from Jesus as we've heard them from the Sermon on the Mount. Do not swear at all. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. Do not resist an evil person. If you're slapped on the cheek, give them the other one also. If they ask for your tunic, give them your cloak also. Whoever compels you to go a mile, go with him too. Love your enemies. Bless them and pray for them. God is blessing them alongside you. Be perfect, like your Father in heaven is perfect.